analogy. So this guy is a former vice president of Google. So once during a TV interview, he made this statement, analogy. In the age of artificial intelligence, data is the new oil and China is the new Saudi Arabia. Now, this is a very bold statement and also quite interesting analogy. We definitely want to use this analogy to understand something about platform-based business because there is a lot of artificial intelligence. But to do that, we cannot just stop by this analogy of new oil. We have to ask more questions. For example, these are the 3 questions we're going to approach throughout this talk. How is this new oil generated and refined? Can the new oil be transported like the traditional oil? And why do some countries have more reserve of the new oil comparing with others? So this is what we're going to ask and try to generate some answers. And we'll try to get more detailed answers through this Chinese company called Ant Financial. Basically, this is just the one department of Alibaba Group. It takes care of the e-payment, the online payment of Alibaba's e-commerce. So for those of you who are not familiar with this context, you can easily map it to the local context. It's like Rahmet, what it means for the Choco family. You find some deals on Choco Life, you make the payment through Rahmet, for example. But in financial case, it's very interesting because it started by 2004. By then, e-commerce was not really starting off. And now it has grown into a big business worth more than 150 billion US dollars as one independent department of Alibaba. It's not the whole Alibaba, it's just one segment. And we want to understand what has happened to this company, what they have done right or wrong. And why do we choose this Chinese company? Of course, I am from China, but I would argue that it's not the most important reason. I'll lay down the rationale why this is so important. So first, most of the platform-based business we can think of, Google, Yandex, Choco Family, or this Alipay, all of them, this platform-based business are invested by venture capital companies. And most of those venture capital investment, as you can see, since 2000 years ago, 2018, 2 years ago, it was already concentrated in China. It means in China, there's the most fierce competition, a lot of experiments going on about platform-based business. So we can generate a lot of lessons and learn from a lot of experience from those who are already fighting fiercely against each other. So this is one important reason. And the other important reason is that there are some successful projects in the US, in the Western European countries about platform-based business, but the entrepreneurial environment is very different from emerging markets such as China, Russia, India, and Kazakhstan. In these countries, in our countries, the market infrastructure is really poor. And so what is successful in America can hardly be replicated in these emerging market countries. But what is successful in Russia can maybe, most likely, more successfully replicated in Kazakhstan context. China is the same. So we want to look for experience and lessons from somewhere similar to the environment, the entrepreneurial soil that we want to plant the ideas in. Finally, Chinese firms get, these platform-based firms get a lot of attention. So when they fail, when they succeed, they get a lot of publicity like this one. So there's a great opportunity for us to extract the information and to learn without experience all the struggles. So since we are talking about e-commerce, it has to start from this point, trust. So in the traditional business, everything happens to face. We don't have to wonder too much whether I can trust this person I'm dealing with. But in the virtual marketplace, as a customer, I would naturally wonder, will my transaction go through? even if the money went through, whether the merchant, the vendor will claim he or she did not receive the money. Or maybe he or she received the money and the good was not sent to me, right? So there are a lot of mistrust going on, not just from the customer to the vendor, but also from the vendor to the customer. After I sent the product to the customer, will this person send me the money? I don't know. I have very little trust in this virtual process because I don't see that person. I don't know that person. Now, there are different type of ways to deal with that. We'll talk about two, and I'll organize another poll, ask your opinion, which one suits better in Kazakhstan context. So the first one is something I actually used recently. It is called cash on delivery. So basically, this is a hybrid model. So the search of product and the order of the e-commerce happens online. And then the transaction happens in the traditional manner. We still meet somebody physically. We pay either by cash or by card payment. The transfer of the goods and the transfer of the money does not take place in the virtual place. So Astykzhan and this Indian company, Flipkart, they follow this model, this hybrid model, cash on delivery. So Alibaba does something different. So it tries to facilitate this trust by acting as an intermediary. So, and the transaction actually are separated into different steps. So how does this intermediary works? So first, as buyer, I pay not to the seller directly, but to Alipay, this financial intermediary organized by Alibaba. And then Alipay, as the escrow account, this intermediary, inform the seller. Now the money has already been sent. You should be really confident, and now the money is here. You can send the product. Now, this is a second step, telling the seller the money is already received by the intermediary. Then the seller can send the product to the customer. And the customer experiences it for 7 days or 2 weeks, telling Alipay everything is fine, the product's quality is really good, and now you can pay the seller. So basically the money stays with Alipay for 2 weeks, 2, 3 at most, and then the whole transaction are separated into different steps. So in case somebody did anything wrong, we just need to find out which step went wrong, and then to debug it and to find out who is not credible. And so in this case, we can easily see that it requires more investment, but it gives more control, right? So we have this two different type of payment system to deal with the trust issue on e-commerce marketplace. Now we have the second poll. Now you are familiarized with these two payment methods. So which one you think works better in Kazakhstan context? You have COD versus cash on delivery. Right, and during the process, please feel free to really pose some question at the message box. It'll be very interesting to have actually interaction among the participants, and also we will filter through some questions and try to answer them towards the end. So it is quite an interactive tool we can also use. Great. So now we have most of the participants already answered. I'll share the results. Obviously, as you should be able to see now, most of us are slightly leaning towards cash on delivery. And the reason, I think, was very straightforward. We have intuitive understanding when e-commerce is relatively new and people need time to adapt to it. And also, so COD, cash on delivery, gives our customer an easy adaptation. They don't need to learn something radically new. And also it requires little investment. We can scale up relatively fast. using this kind of a method rather than building a very solid e-payment system, which may take years, right? Now, it becomes interesting if we keep asking questions. So this works the same reason right now we're voting for COD. It's the same reality when Alibaba started this Alipay, the escrow system, because it started 2004. By then, Chinese consumers were barely ready with this kind of virtual payment. This is really new, and I am the kind of person who adopted this technology 5-6 years after it was already in the market. It's really new for somebody as me, who by then was a college student. It was too novel for me to go through these 5 steps to understand how does that work. So why did Alibaba choose escrow over COD? And obviously, both payments, actually methods, give the company the option to send money between the buyers and sellers, right? There must be something more than that for Alibaba to choose this Alipay escrow service. So for that, we have to ask ourselves, why is that? If the transaction went through all right, and then COD, cash on delivery, and escrow, these 2 methods makes no difference. But when the buyer and seller have a dispute, we need to find out what is going wrong to improve their experience and to also help them to spread the good reputation of our platform. We need to solve it. And without knowing which step went wrong, it's impossible. And we have this local example we can easily relate to. InDriver is one of the ride-sharing company where the payment process is totally delegated to the rider and the driver. So basically, if there's a dispute between the driver and the passenger, and somebody is not satisfied with the service quality or the payment did not happen by the amount it was indicated, it was very difficult for InDriver to find out, right? So basically, this kind of escrow service and this methods give the company more control. And we'll talk more about that. And now we slightly touched on the data, the new oil generation process. And now this part is also quite interesting, how this new oil can be refined for more business value. We talked about in the escrow service. So there's money sitting on the escrow account. Alipay is helping the buyer and the seller by taking care of the money in the process. And eventually, after 2 weeks or 3, sending the money to the seller. That means at some point each day, there are a large amount of money sitting on this escrow account. So I want you to guess. So what is the amount? It starts by US dollar billion. So you can give a guess. So here you can type your answer in the message box. Let me open it. In the message box, you can write maybe 1 billion, 2 billion, 5 billion, whatever amount you think that is reasonable. Give a guess. Write down a number. How much money do you think at one day sit in the escrow account that Alipay takes care of for its customers? Can one of you do that? In the message box, 1 billion. Okay, we have 5 billion. Okay, great. 80 billion. I like this guessing process. It's very interesting. You'll be about to see the result. Let me show you. So this is the amount. So March 2018, 2 years ago, there was more than 260 billion sitting in that account. So basically that money is not being used. It was just waiting in the process to be sent to the seller, right? So how do Alibaba actually take advantage of this new oil and generate more value? Let's see. So Alibaba has these 2 financial service arms, 2 more departments of the Ant Financial. So they provide financial service to the buyer and to the seller. How do they do that? So in the November 11th, that is called Singles Day, it's like the Black Friday in China, people buy things at a discounted price. One day, 24 hours, the sales revenue goes at this amount, almost 40 billion US dollars. And that created a lot of pressure for the sellers actually to prepare for the order, the shipment, a lot of pre-ordering things. Logistically, it takes a lot of money, more than what they can typically afford. And the consumer also want to take advantage this discount period, and all of them need money. And Alibaba, basing on the information, who is credible and which customer, which vendor is reliable, it knows all the information. And it has all those money generated not by itself, but basically this is money provided by the consumer themselves. And now Alibaba is using this money and lend it back to the customer and lend it back to the merchant. And then they pay Alibaba the interest rate. So that's how we imagine this, imagine how this company can become profitable. Basically, all the resources, the data, the financial resources are generated by the customer, and then it's used back to the customer again. You might wonder why other companies are not taking this opportunity to also lend money to, for example, the consumers, right? They just don't have the information, who is trustworthy. For example, one of my friends who is a private tutor and his business is really successful, he can easily get more than 10,000 US dollars per month. But he can barely, so far he has not get a credit card yet. Because for the Chinese state-owned banks, they don't know the credibility of my friend. He does not have that much information in the banking system. But obviously Alibaba knows. And this great profitable opportunity would be seized, grasped by Alibaba, not by the state-owned banks, right? And by this time, I think those who are in Kazakhstan or familiar with this model, you might be already wondering. So we have Rahmet, this company also providing kind of e-payment solution. Isn't that somehow similar to Alipay? So this is what I understand about Rahmet. It takes care of the transfer of the money. So let's look carefully. We have 5 steps here. What are these 5 steps about? What information they gather? Basically, step 1 and step 5, they are about money, right? The money has been sent to Alipay, and Alipay as an escrow account eventually send the money to the seller. And then there are some other steps which collect data not exactly about monetary information, but about the movement of goods and the quality of goods. These are completely different type of data. And so we need to, if we want to think whether Rahmet will be very similar or is already very similar to Alipay, we want to ask ourselves whether this synergistic data between money and goods, the product, is both there, possessed by Rahmet. And these are so important because with only money, without knowing whether the goods has been transferred, the quality of the goods, we cannot generate the credibility information about buyer and seller. And then it's difficult to lend money to them because we don't know whether they will return the money, they will pay service the loan, right? And at this point, I want to bring out this extension of the analogy. So in the oil and gas industry, oil and gas are really independent. It's routinely, very commonly, oil and gas company would just waste all the gas because even if we produce all the gas, the oil is still the main product. The price of the oil will not be changed because just we produce more gas. The oil is still the oil. The price is determined by the market, right? But here it's like the oil and gas for the e-commerce, different kind of data, new oil, but we need them to work together. There is a synergistic effect. They enhance each other. They actually make each other more valuable, which is very different from the traditional oil that the gas and oil operate independently. We can totally ignore the gas in this area, in this context. So now we generate some kind of answers to the first question we try to understand. So how can the new oil data be generated and refined? And we have some more intuitive way of designing the platform. COD might work very well in certain contexts, but we want to bear in mind that may lead to loss of valuable data. From that point on, we don't gather much data, and all the refinement process does not benefit us. And also, it's quite important in this new oil setting, different kind of new oil, different types of data, they can create synergy between across them. Okay, this is one question. And second question is relatively straightforward. We won't have much tension going on there. It's very simple. We want to ask ourselves, we know that traditional oil can be transported from one country to another by the pipeline, by the oil tanker. And now we have the data, which can be copy-pasted rather easily, right? And the Alibaba has already gathered so much data. And does that mean Alibaba and its financial department and financial can take advantage of the data and help the company to enter foreign markets, right? So what we're seeing here is a little bit of exaggeration, but it shows what is happening in the Chinese cities. Even the beggars collect money by e-payment. Basically, if you are telling the beggar, sorry, I don't have any change, and they will tell you, it doesn't matter, give me your phone, you can still scan here, and you don't need to have any change. So that tells us how much our life actually in Chinese cities are already totally recorded and collected as in the form of data by a company like Alibaba or like Tencent, WeChat, right? So with that data, and this company can generate a lot of business value as we just discussed. But does that mean the data can be transferred? For example, if Alipay want to enter Kazakhstan, let's say, can this company offer the kind of micro loan to consumers here and also to vendors here? You can easily write yes or no in the message box. Can the company do that? Entering Kazakhstan market by taking advantage of the data Alibaba has already collected in China. It's da, yes, okay. Great. Great. There is the data, but be aware, yeah. What does that data mean, right? We have that data, but in China, the transaction has already happening. The company knows so many transactions and why each transaction failed or succeeded. Whether this customer I'm going to lend money to actually is the main reason why the transaction failed, because this is a customer who always says something negative about anything he or she buys. They will always try to get the product without paying. And then I'm not going to lend money to this customer. But when Alipay tries to enter this new market, it won't have that information. It can still enter, but basically every transaction, every loan it extends, for example, to the local vendors here in Nursultan or to local consumers, it equals more to gamble or to charity other than good business, right? Because they don't know the really just trustworthiness of each vendor and each customer. We can discuss more about that, right? So this is another question. The data can definitely be transferred, but in this case, credit data generated from e-commerce is more context specific. And company can know a lot about its consumers in one market. Actually, it may not be that valuable when the company tries to enter another market. Actually, Alibaba itself also has tremendous challenge when it tries to enter the countryside market, because it doesn't know good information about the merchants there and the new customer there who have barely used the system. So there's new credibility data about those residents even in China. But let me stress here again, this is only about credit data in e-commerce, right? It's really individual specific, context specific. If we want to use one country example, I would think the medical diagnostic data. We test a lot of data and try to understand what does this medical scan tells us about the patient's disease. Those kind of data probably is a lot more transferable without really damaging the value of the data, right? And let's remember your question, really post your question here when you think more about it, and let's reach to all of them, have more interactive discussion towards the end. And now we have the other part of the analogy. So China as new Saudi Arabia, really? You might be thinking, yeah, China has a lot of data because this is a country with a lot of population, with more people, you get more data. Yes, that's one part of it, but I would say not the most important part. And something actually Kazakhstan as an emerging market country can also benefit from. Let's look deeper into this. We have these two companies. So when Alipay entered into the market, 2004, it was considered as the Chinese version of PayPal, right? It really looked like PayPal. But now, 16 years later, Alipay has evolved into this whole ecosystem of products, offering financial service to vendors, offering financial services to its customers. But PayPal remained the same. We would want to ask ourselves what happened. And now it obviously already grown to more than $150 in terms of billion, right? We want to ask, why couldn't PayPal offer the same product to such as my bank, to financial service, to the vendors, or and check later to customers, to American customer, right? And that answer lies really in the market infrastructure between these two countries. In China, as I mentioned, my friend has good income, but he cannot get access to credit card. And that is also reflected in the massive data. Only less than 1/3 of the Chinese population have access to credit cards. But in comparison, when we look at it, the US, less than 14% lacked a credit score. And China is only in the process trying to generate a credit score. We're far from there yet. So that's helped us to understand actually American customers do not need that kind of financial service because they're already getting it from the current financial system, from the banks, from their credit card providers. That's why when American e-commerce operator like Amazon, like PayPal, when they enter China, it's difficult for them to figure out actually because they're already using credit cards as a payment. They don't really, it's very challenging for them to realize the Chinese customers need some different type of transaction payment methods. And that can create that much value as we just discussed. It's just outside their understanding, their cognitive framework. And that explains why that basically it is like entrepreneurs trying to build cars and those from the mature market, like Western European countries and America, they can build fascinating cars. And the cars are really good independently of themselves. But without realizing there's no functionable road for those kind of cars yet. And so basically those kind of contextual understanding is somewhere more salient for the entrepreneurs operating in their context. They know what is working, what is not. And that's why the so-called emerging market countries, China, South Africa, India, Brazil, Russia, Kazakhstan, the same. We share some very similar market infrastructure. Some of the basic roads are not there. That's why for some countries, it's easier to upgrade the infrastructure like high-speed railways or high-speed road. But for other countries, they already have it. It's difficult to tear everything apart and build new things, right? And that's where we want to think, you know, as emerging market countries, we might have certain advantage, you know, actually because of the poor market infrastructure that poses as a constraint. It is also to a certain extent a very a very valuable opportunity for the local entrepreneurs to take advantage of. So here we have approached these 3 questions we started with.